Thank you for being here. This is our third annual Health and Human Services Forum. And as many of you know, the purpose of this forum is to provide a report card, if you will, a status report on what's happening in our community, how we're doing in terms of tackling health and human service issues in our community. A few years ago, United Way led an effort that engaged the community in identifying what were the most pressing needs in our community. And they fell into four broad categories: education, health, safety, and self-sufficiency. And what you'll be hearing today is certain subjects within those four priority areas and hearing what's happening to them. Are we making progress? Are new issues emerging within those areas? Are there things we need to be taking a look at that we haven't thus far? We have a great group of sponsors today that I would like to acknowledge. Group Real Solutions in Healthcare, thank you to them. Three Rivers Convention Center, Charter Communication, and Lord's Health Network. Thank you to our sponsors. We also have some great speakers that you'll be hearing from today. One of the people that we are very privileged to have today is our distinguished Washington Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. As the state's legal officer, his responsibilities are immense. He directs 500 attorneys and 600 professional staff in providing services to state agencies, the governor, and legislature. Attorney General Ferguson received his law degree from New York University and a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Washington, where he was student body president. He began his law career as a clerk for judges in Eastern Washington and in the Midwest, then returned to Seattle to join the law firm of Preston, Gates, and Ellis, now known as K&L Gates. He went on to be elected King County Council, where he served for a number of years before becoming Washington's 18th Attorney General in 2012. Would you please join me in welcoming Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
Good morning, and thanks so much for that kind introduction. It's great to be here with all of you this morning, and I appreciate the chance to share a few words about, I was asked to speak a bit about the AG's office and work that we do that relates, frankly, to the topics you're facing, and there's a lot of interconnections there. Before I get started, I'll just mention that, not mentioned in my introduction is the fact that my wife, Colleen, and I have 7-year-old twins, Jack and Katie. We live over on the west side, and a few months ago, I found out, I'm sometimes asked what's the best part about being Attorney General, and I got the answer from my son Jack. He was going through a phase where he's afraid of the dark because he thinks there's ghosts and goblins that are going to come out and get him when he goes into a dark room, right? So I sat down to have a conversation with Jack that I suspect a lot of you have had with your kids of that age, and I said, look, Jack, you don't need to be afraid of the dark because ghosts and goblins, they're not real. But I sensed he didn't believe me, right? So like any good lawyer, I had an alternative argument in case the first one didn't work. So my backup argument was, I said, well, look, Jack, even if they are real, ghosts and goblins, you don't need to worry about them because I'm your daddy. My job is to keep you safe. That's what daddies do. So as long as I'm around, you don't have to worry about them. You can be in a dark room. So he thought about that and he wandered off. And a couple days later, I was working at home and Jack and Katie were in the next room. And Katie, of course, is walking around turning out all the lights to terrorize her brother and tell him that the ghosts and goblins are coming out. So I'm about to get up and walk in the room to break it up when I hear Jack say in a very confident voice, he said, Katie, no ghosts or goblins can bother me as long as I'm sitting next to the Attorney General. That's the best. So that's the best part about being Attorney General. He thinks we have, I'm not sure what he thinks my job is, but apparently it involves ghosts and goblins and going after them. So now ghosts and goblins are not real, but there are some things in our in our lives that are real, that are threats to public safety, to our children. There are challenges in our community, and so fortunately Jack and Katie are at an innocent age, but I know all of you really work on a lot of those issues to help folks out who need assistance, whether it's self-sufficiency, health, public safety, all the things you're talking about here today. And so again, I'm just going to say a few words. I've got a few slides to walk through some things that we work on in our office. Let's see if I've got my slides. Perfect. So just real quickly, I'll give you an overview of our office, just so you have a sense of who we are and what we do. We have over 1,000 employees, as you heard from Beverly, about half our attorneys, half our support staff. We have 13 offices around the state. We have one here in the Tri-Cities, for example. And the work that we do is wide-ranging. I'll be giving you a slight sense of that. We do work on behalf of children. If there's a child who is in an abusive home situation, our attorneys and support staff are the ones who appear before court if that child needs to be removed from that household and placed into a more stable situation. That's an example of work that we do, especially here in our Tri-Cities office, for example. So basically, any issue, if you're reading about what's going on at the state, whether the cleanup at Hanford or big decisions from the state Supreme Court around education funding, we're the law firm for the state, right? We're the folks who represent the people and all of our clients on any legal issue facing the state. And so I decided to pick a couple issues that touch on, that might be related to work that you're doing that you may be of interest. A big one is we enforce our consumer protection laws. This is critical. We've got a big team that does this. So if somebody's not playing by the rules, we're there to advocate for consumers. That could be a Wall Street bank around a foreclosure that isn't following the law, right? It could be a big Wall Street issue, or it could be a smaller issue closer to home. Small or big, we handle those complaints. So we receive about 20,000 emails every year from Washington State residents asking us to assist them with something along these lines. So it's important for consumers, right? If they've been the victim of a scam or someone didn't play by the rule, especially if a powerful interest isn't playing by the rule, your typical Washingtonian cannot hire a high-priced corporate attorney to take on a Wall Street bank, right? That's what an AG's office can do to help those folks out, and we take that really seriously. So with those complaints, we go into action and try to help folks out and get money back to them. That's not only important for consumers, it's important to businesses that play by the rules, right? If you're a business owner and you're following the rules, you do not want to be at a competitive disadvantage to a business, to a competitor who doesn't follow the rules, right? So for a lot of ways, we do this. There's one case in particular I thought I would mention that's close to us here today. It's a lawsuit I filed recently out of Mattawa, and just real brief on the background. In Mattawa, there was a really tragic fire a number of years ago in a rental property, and I believe a parent and a child actually died in the fire. It was quite tragic. And as a result, the Mattawa City Council passed an ordinance saying, hey, if you're a landlord, you've got to have certain basic standards in the units that you rent. Okay, you have certain basic standards of safety and all that type of thing. And there was a landlord, a guy named Gary Chavez, and what he did was he had some properties, and what he did was, there's a lot of migrant farm workers work there, a lot of folks who, if they speak English, it's definitely as a second language. And what he did was, he'd been renting units to these folks. What he did was he then sold the properties to these folks, but not really. He had paperwork saying it's a sale, and therefore he did not have to follow the ordinance, because it wasn't a rental. He now sold it. But of course, when folks left these units, they did not sell their unit. They didn't get the unit. He kept the unit, right? So he engaged in essentially sham sales to evade this, this requirement from the Mattawa City Council. And so we brought a lawsuit against him. I think my next slide, if I've got this right, is going to launch right into just a short news clip about it, which probably does a better job of describing it than anything I could say. So we'll see if this
On Tuesday, we told you about an alarming case of neglect at Sun and Sand Mobile Home Park in Mattawa. The state is suing the owner for forcing tenants to sign fake purchase contracts in order to avoid health and safety inspections.
Veronica Quinteros went to the mobile home park today to check out the poor conditions of those homes. Veronica, what did you find?
Tracy, Shane, I went inside these homes today and saw some truly unlivable conditions. From rotting carpet to collapsing roofs and broken air conditioners, the situation at Sun and Sand is shocking. Current and former residents told me that at the moment they signed to rent these homes, they are pressured into signing fake purchase contracts without getting a translation of the document. The possibility of eviction and in many cases deportation has kept many residents in a state of fear. Amanda told me in Spanish, what I think is that since I signed these papers so that I am the owner, but I have no rights, then how am I the owner? This is only a scam that I am going through. I also talked to former resident Ana Ramos, who told me that when she lived at Sun and Sand Mobile Home Park, nothing was done about a caving closet wall and holes in the floor of her trailer, making it unbearably cold during the winter months. She lived in these conditions for several years. I tried talking to the current manager at Sun and Sand, but she denied me an interview. Live in the studio, Veronica Quintero, NBC Right Now.
So that's an example, maybe a particularly shocking example, but that's an example of the work that we do in our office. And on behalf of the people in our community who are facing some real challenges and who may not have the resources to have their own advocate, right? And that's what is really important to me as Attorney General, that we can do that on behalf of folks. That litigation's ongoing right now. We're optimistic on how that's going to end up, and we'll be able to make improvements for folks who live at Sun and Sand. Another issue, and I think you may be even talking a little bit later on about issues related to cybercrime, that type of thing. There's a lot I could say about this. I'm going to touch briefly on this, but data breaches, of course, are ubiquitous now. It seems like every week you pick up the paper, it's Target, it's the Archdiocese of Seattle. That was one that impacted my family. They're ubiquitous. And so I took a look at the state of Washington state law on protections for consumers around data breaches that occur. And as Attorney General, I can propose laws. I'm not a lawmaker, right? That's the legislature. But as Attorney General, I can propose laws to the legislature. It's called AG request legislation. Goes through the normal legislative process, but all legislators know that I proposed it, basically, which hopefully helps in the process. And so I looked at our laws around data breaches and realized that our law was originally written more than a decade ago and has not been changed at all. And as you all know, things have changed a lot around the world of data breaches in the last decade or more. And so we really felt that protections for consumers in Washington state were amongst the worst in the country. I'll just give you an example. If there's a data breach, before we proposed this change, if there was a data breach, there was no deadline by which an entity like Target has to notify you if your personal information was stolen. And not only was there no deadline, there were many exceptions that were so broad in many situations they would never have to notify you at all. There was no requirement that they had to notify my office, which would be helpful so I can notify consumers, go after the bad guys, that type of thing. So we really felt we had one of the worst laws in the country in terms of notifications to consumers and protections for consumers. We proposed a change to that to eliminate all those exceptions, to require a deadline by which they must notify you and give you some information about the data breach, and to notify my office as well. And I'm really pleased to say that that bill was passed and signed by the governor this last session. Another issue that I want to touch on is around e-cigarettes and vapor products. A big part of my world for the last 2.5 years, I got elected in 2012, so the last 2.5 years has been around marijuana legalization and issues related to e-cigarettes and vapor products. And one thing I just will say about this, there's a lot I could say, but there are a lot of requirements around marijuana, okay? Who it can be sold to, in what way it can be sold, protections around packaging for marijuana-infused edibles, you get the idea. But really when it comes to e-cigarettes, for example, it's essentially the Wild West. This is largely unregulated by the state, which has, from my standpoint, from a health standpoint, has some serious consequences. The health implications for e-cigarettes, there's a lot of studies going on, but I'm convinced they will turn out not to be positive for folks. And you can see some examples there where it's illegal to sell tobacco, for example, out of a vending machine, but legal to sell vapor products out of a vending machine. You can not sell tobacco over the internet, but it's legal to sell vapor products over the internet. So we proposed last year a bill to regulate when it comes to e-cigarettes and vapor products. That did not pass. I'll be bringing it back again this coming session to see if we can get it through again. We just want to highlight that issue for you. And it's a big one also around marijuana-infused edibles. We've done really well with that. When the people legalized marijuana, one aspect of that was marijuana-infused edibles. So think cookies, candy bars are marijuana-infused edibles. And look, I know what my 7-year-old twins do if they see a cookie on the kitchen counter at our house, right? Don't tell mom and dad and eat the cookie as quickly as possible, right? That's what they do. They're 7-year-old twins. But that's a problem that cookie is infused with marijuana, right? And so we've done a lot of work to make sure that the packaging around marijuana-infused edibles is not appealing to children, right? Is packaged in a way that they cannot access it. And we've had a lot of success with doing that. So here, as I mentioned before, the legislation we're proposing to address this and provide enforcement authority to the Liquor and Cannabis Control Board. That's the entity that regulates marijuana in this state. And we want to have enforcement authority for e-cigarettes and vapor products. Hey, simple things like requiring a special license for stores that want to sell these products. It seems pretty basic, right? But we don't have that right now. We need a change in state law to make that happen. So I mentioned the marijuana-infused products, and I guess what I'll just say is, in terms of our role, if an initiative is approved by the voters, our job is to defend that initiative. So my job is to defend the legalization of marijuana. Within that, there are issues like marijuana-infused edibles that can be a real challenge for health in our community and for youth, and that's why we get engaged on the marijuana-infused products, the packaging around that as well. You know, before I get to this, this is I think my last issue, but one thing I did want to mention, I think on your agenda, it's not on my talking points, but I think I was talking to Beverly, I think, before, and I think prevention suicide is mentioned as one of your topics, and which I really appreciate. I don't have a talking point on this, but you know, like a lot of folks, I come from a family that's had some challenges there. I'm from a large family. I'm one of 7 kids, and my mom and dad are both from large families as well. My father's passed away, but my mom is still very much alive, and one of my dad's brothers was in World War II. He survived the sinking of the Quincy, which was the largest naval disaster in the history of the United States, and I think it still is to this day. And it was a really tough situation. The guys were in the water overnight. There were sharks. It's really difficult to read. I can't imagine what it was like to survive it. But he survived that, and he came back home, and he got married, was married for many decades, raised a family, had a successful career, and when he should have been enjoying his golden years, he went to a park and committed suicide. He shot himself. And he didn't leave a note. He just did it. And it was a shock, as you can imagine, to my family. It was not something that we saw, you know, come. I don't think my parents saw it coming at all. So I've kind of realized I've been very involved in these issues as elected official, because I think there's often a stigma around mental health issues and suicide in particular. But you know, ever since I started talking about my experience with it, it's amazing. If I ever do, someone always comes up and says, you know what, my family member this, or my mother has this situation. That's true with my friends who I talk to about it. And so I just appreciate the fact that you're addressing that issue with your program here today. So protecting the elderly is a big one for us. As you can see there, Adult Protective Services receives more than 13,000 reports of abuse, abandonment, neglect, self-neglect, and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults each year. And we pursue those folks. And that could, whether it's on the civil side or on the criminal side, we go after folks who engage in these really awful actions. I'll just give you one example. This was a case out of Auburn, I believe, in which a social worker at the hospital reported suspected abuse. The victim's care was paid for by the Medicaid program, and our Medicaid fraud control unit investigates that work. And as a result, we actually were able to get a criminal conviction, felony neglect conviction against that individual. So we have a team of folks who look out for adults in both the criminal setting as well as the civil setting. And just what I'll wrap up with saying is that you know, it's been a big focus of ours. In fact, I was in the Tri-Cities just, I think, a week or two ago. It's a partnership we have with the AARP. They reminded me I became a member. I turned 50 not too long ago. They gave me a huge card saying, "Welcome to AARP." I wasn't sure I was ready, but I guess I am. And so, but we have a great partnership with them. We're sort of educating folks about scams that are out there, and a lot of scams target folks who are seniors. And the results can really just be heartbreaking. The scams that are out there. In fact, when I spoke to a gentleman, came up to me afterwards and mentioned he'd been victimized by a scam. It's cost him many, many, many thousands of dollars. And I know that folks hear about these scams. You think, hey, nobody would ever fall for that, right? Trust me, folks fall for it. All the time, every single day, our office hears about it. And it's heartbreaking. The stories are heartbreaking. And I just encourage you to really communicate with folks, whether it's loved ones in your life or friends, about these scams. There's a lot of resources out there. The AARP has a lot of resources. And you know, my mother's now 87, still lives independently. Her memory's better than any of her 7 kids. She's as sharp as she ever was. But you know, she's not used to computers, for example. She did not grow up in that. She's a retired school teacher, but computers were not a part of her world. And I remember not long after I got elected, I went to visit her at where she lives, just to check in, and she was there on her computer. And I walked in, she said, well, you know, Bobby, I'm glad you're here. I've got this strange email from my friend Susan. So I walked over to look at the email, and it was an email from Susan, right, to my mom, Dear Betty, and Susan's saying that she's traveling in New York or wherever she is, or London, and she's lost her passport, or something's gone wrong, right? And would my mom send her some money? I mean, you all know, right, where this is going. But honestly, to my mom, it's from her friend Susan, addressed to her, and you know, the part that was strange to her was she knows her friend well, and she wasn't aware her friend was traveling, and she thought she would know that, right? And I said, well, Mom, I think this is a scam, right? That people can hack into your friend's email and send these out. And so she just called her friend up, and of course Susan was at home a mile away. But folks fall for this, and not every 87-year-old woman living on her own has a son who's the Attorney General to stop by and check on her, right? That's not the way it works. But it is important to communicate to folks about these scams, because it is heartbreaking. We see it all the time. And lastly, just know that our office is a resource to you, right? On any of these issues or many others I'd not get a chance to get to, feel free to call or write to our office about any of these issues. We have a team of attorneys, many of them right here, and support staff right here in the Tri-Cities who want to help on cases like Sun and Sand or elder abuse or data breaches. So just know that we're a resource. I appreciate all the work that all of you do on behalf of folks in our community to make a difference, and thanks for the chance to say a few words as well. Thanks, everybody.